My uncle liked to speak in conclusions, not opinions, not suggestions. Final truths that we were standing in my mother's living room, plates balanced on our knees, the hum of conversation filling the spaces between his words. Someone had asked how work was going. I answered carefully, briefly. That's when he leaned forward, folded his hands, and said it. Profit can't buy peace. He said it kindly, confidently, like someone passing down wisdom he'd already lived. A few people nodded. I smiled, because what I didn't say, what no one in that room knew, was this. They didn't know what I had already done. My uncle had always been like this. The moral compass, the warning voice, the man who believed money was something you survived, not something you shaped. He spoke often about contentment, about modesty, about not chasing, and every time his eyes flicked toward me. Just long enough. You work too much, he said now, shaking his head gently. I've seen people lose themselves that way. I took a sip of water. I like my work, I replied. He smiled sympathetically. That's what everyone says before they realize what really matters. There it was. Not concern. Correction. I used to argue with him. Years ago. I used to explain margins, decisions, systems, things he didn't want to hear. Now I let him finish. Because time had taught me something important. Peace doesn't need defending. Someone changed the subject. But the words stayed with me. Profit can't buy peace. He believed that. Because in his life, profit had always arrived with stress. Deadlines. Dependence. Noise. What he didn't understand was that profit behaves differently when it's structured quietly. I left early that night. Not upset. Aware. There's a difference. As I drove home, I passed the old oak tree that separated my street from his. Same neighborhood. Different realities. He rented. I owned. And not just the house I lived in. The house next door had been on my radar for months. Not because it was beautiful. It wasn't. It was loud. Tenants rotated every year. Cars came and went at odd hours. Music leaked through walls on nights I needed silence. Peace matters when you've earned it. I'd made an offer quietly. No rush. No emotion. Just math and timing. The seller hadn't responded yet. That was fine. I wasn't in a hurry. The funny thing about people who lecture you about peace is how loud they are while doing it. My uncle talked about serenity like it was a virtue you claimed. I treated it like an asset you secured. The next time we saw each other, he brought it up again. You know, he said, cornering me near the kitchen, you could simplify. I smiled politely. I already have, I replied. He laughed. That's not what I meant. I know, I said. What he didn't see were my mornings. Quiet. Unrushed. No alarm clock screaming obligation. What he didn't see were my numbers. Not impressive in isolation. Powerful in accumulation. And what he didn't see, what no one saw yet, was how deliberately I was removing friction from my life. A week later, the seller accepted my offer. No negotiation. No drama. Just a signed agreement and a date. I read the email twice. Not because I was surprised. Because I felt something settle. The kind of calm that doesn't come from words. I didn't tell my family. Not yet. Because announcing peace too early invites commentary. And commentary disturbs it. My uncle called me the next Sunday. Just checking in, he said. You sounded tired last time. I smiled. I'm not, I replied. He paused. Good, he said. Remember, profit can't buy peace. I looked out my window. At the house next door. Soon to be quiet. Soon to be mine. Yes, I said softly. I let him believe that. That night, as I reviewed the closing documents, I thought about how easily people confuse philosophy with limitation. About how often peace is used to justify staying small. And how little noise it actually takes to change your environment when you've planned correctly. I closed my laptop and sat in silence. Real silence. The kind my uncle talked about. The kind I was about to control. And for the first time, I wondered what he'd say when he realized something uncomfortable. That peace doesn't reject profit. It requires it. The closing happened on a Tuesday. No champagne. No congratulations. Just signatures, keys, and a silence that felt intentional. That's how I like my wins. I walked through the house next door alone. It smelled like old carpet and unfamiliar choices. The walls were scuffed. The windows rattled slightly when the wind passed through. To anyone else, it would have looked like a problem. To me, it looked like control. I didn't renovate right away. That surprised people later. But peace doesn't come from immediacy. It comes from certainty. I changed the locks, updated the utilities, let the house sit quietly while I decided what it would become. Absence is underrated. My uncle noticed the for sale sign was gone before anyone else did. He always paid attention to appearances. That house sold fast, he said one afternoon, standing on the sidewalk as we crossed paths. Yes, I replied. Must have gone to an investor, he added, tone tinged with disapproval. People like that don't care about community. I smiled politely. They care about different things, I said. He nodded, satisfied with his judgment. I didn't correct him. Not because I was hiding. Because I was observing. The noise stopped first. No late-night music. No unfamiliar cars. The street breathed differently. I slept with my windows open for the first time in years. Peace doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself in what's missing. At the next family gathering, my uncle repeated his favorite phrase. Chasing profit always costs something, he said, spoon tapping against his plate. You have to ask yourself what you're giving up. Several people nodded. I didn't. Because I knew exactly what I'd given up. Nothing I wanted. A neighbor asked me about the empty house. Do you know who bought it? She said. Yes, I replied. She smiled. I hope they're quiet. I smiled back. They will be. The paperwork finalized quietly. Taxes. Insurance. Maintenance plans. No fanfare. Just alignment. My uncle mentioned the house again a week later. I heard the new owner hasn't moved in, he said. Strange, don't you think? Not really, I replied. He frowned. People usually rush. Only when they're unsure, I said. He laughed lightly, dismissing the comment. But something in his expression shifted. He started watching the house. Not consciously. Instinctively. People do that when they sense a pattern forming they didn't anticipate. One evening, he knocked on my door. Casual. Unannounced. Everything okay next door? He asked. Yes, I replied. You sure? He pressed. It's been awfully quiet. I smiled. That's the point. He stood there a moment longer than necessary, then nodded and left. I closed the door gently, because doors have a way of marking boundaries people don't realize they've crossed. The peace settled deeper. Not just outside. Inside. I stopped clenching my jaw without realizing it. Stopped waking up alert for sound. Peace isn't passive. It's engineered. What my uncle didn't realize yet was that this wasn't about real estate. It was about alignment, removing friction, designing my life to support who I'd become, not who I was trying to justify. The house next door stayed empty, and that emptiness spoke louder than any lecture. I knew the moment would come when someone would ask directly. Not politely, not philosophically, but personally. And when they did, the answer wouldn't be defensive. It would be factual, because profit didn't buy my peace. Planning did. Profit just made it executable. The question finally came on a Sunday afternoon. Not from my uncle. From someone else. And that's how I knew it mattered. We were all outside, chairs pulled into uneven circles, the smell of grilled food hanging in the air. Conversation drifted the way it always did. Half-remembered stories, light complaints, the comfort of repetition. Then my cousin leaned over. So, she said, nodding toward the empty house next door. Do you know what's happening with that place? I took a sip of my drink. Yes, I said. She smiled. It's been so quiet. Honestly, it's been amazing. My uncle's head turned. Not sharply. Slowly. Oh, he said. You know the owner? I met his eyes. Yes. There was a pause. The kind people don't notice until it stretches just a second too long. And, he prompted. I set my glass down. I bought it. The words didn't land all at once. They rippled. Someone laughed, assuming it was a joke. Someone else blinked, recalculating. My uncle didn't smile. He studied my face carefully. You bought it? He asked. Yes, I replied. Why? He said, genuinely confused. That question carried everything. Concern. Judgment. A hint of disappointment. For peace, I said simply. The group went quiet. Not stunned. Uncomfortable. Because peace was supposed to be free. Earned through restraint, not ownership. My uncle cleared his throat. Well, he said, choosing his words, that seems excessive. I nodded. It depends on what noise costs you, I replied. He frowned. You could have just talked to the tenants, he said. Worked something out. I did, I said calmly. With myself. He shook his head slowly. This is what I mean, he said. Profit changes people. I smiled. No, I replied. Clarity does. The conversation shifted awkwardly after that. Someone asked about dessert. Another person mentioned the weather. But something had changed. The idea my uncle had been comfortable with, that money corrupts peace, had just collided with a counterexample sitting quietly in a lawn chair. Later, he pulled me aside. "You didn't need to do that," he said quietly. "You're letting money make decisions for you." I met his eyes. "I'm letting money stop making decisions for me," I replied. He looked away. That night, after everyone left, I walked the property line between the two houses. The air was still. No music. No voices. No tension. Just space. Owned. The next morning, my uncle knocked again. This time, his tone was different. Less certain. "I've been thinking," he said. "About what you said." I waited. "You really think buying something can give you peace?" he asked. I considered the question. "No," I replied. "But it can remove what takes it away." That answer stayed with him. I could tell. He didn't argue. He didn't lecture. He just nodded slowly. And for the first time, I saw doubt flicker behind his certainty. What I didn't realize then was that the house wasn't finished doing its work. Not as an investment. As a mirror. Because soon my uncle would be forced to confront something deeper than noise. He'd have to face the difference between choosing peace. My uncle grew quieter after that. Not angry. Not distant. Thoughtful. Which for him was more unsettling than either. He stopped quoting phrases. Stopped offering conclusions. Instead, he watched. The house. The street. Me. People who believe they already understand life don't like discovering unanswered questions inside their certainty. One evening, he joined me on the porch. Uninvited, but not unwelcome. We sat side by side, the space between us filled with the kind of silence that used to make him uncomfortable. It didn't anymore. "It's peaceful," he said finally. "Yes," I replied. Not triumphantly. Just honestly. "I always thought peace came from letting go," he said. I nodded. "Sometimes it does." "And sometimes," he asked. "Sometimes it comes from removing what doesn't belong," I said. He stared ahead. That answer unsettled him. The discomfort showed up in small ways. He started mentioning costs more often. Repair bills. Taxes. Hidden burdens. As if listing them might rebalance the equation. I didn't argue. Peace doesn't debate. At the next family gathering, someone joked about me becoming a landlord. I smiled. My uncle didn't. He watched the reactions carefully. Not jealous. Reevaluating. Later, he pulled me aside again. "I worry you're tying your happiness to ownership," he said. I looked at him. "I tied my happiness to environment," I replied. "Ownership just made it adjustable." He sighed. "You make it sound simple." "It's not," I said. "It's deliberate." That word stayed between us. Deliberate. Because his version of peace had always been passive. Mine was designed. And design requires responsibility. He began asking questions he'd never asked before. "How long did you plan this? Was it stressful? Did you hesitate?" I answered truthfully. "Years. Yes. Every day." Those answers surprised him. Because they didn't sound reckless. They sounded intentional. One afternoon, he admitted something quietly. "I always thought people who chased profit were running from something." I nodded. "Some are." "And you?" he asked. "I was running towards something," I replied. He smiled faintly. That distinction mattered. The discomfort peaked when he saw the inside of the house. Not renovated. Not flashy. Just calm. Clean lines. Neutral tones. Rooms that didn't demand attention. "This is it?" he asked. "This is it," I replied. He walked slowly through the space. Touching walls. Opening windows. Listening. "You didn't buy status," he said. "No," I replied. "I bought silence." He laughed softly. Not mocking. Relieved. That night, he called me. "I used to think money complicated everything," he said. "And now?" I asked. "And now I think it just reveals what you're already doing with your life," he replied. I smiled. That was progress. But discomfort doesn't disappear overnight. It reshapes itself. Because next would come something harder than doubt. Admission. And people only arrive there when they feel safe enough to let go of certainty. The admission didn't come in a confession. It came in a comparison. We were walking the block together one evening, the sun low enough to soften everything it touched. The street felt different now, lighter, less guarded. Even the air seemed to move slower. My uncle stopped near the property line and looked at the house next door. "I used to think this kind of thing was indulgent," he said. I waited. "But now," he continued, I wonder if I just never gave myself permission. There it was. Not regret. Recognition. We kept walking. He talked about his early years. About jobs he'd stayed in too long because they were reasonable. About noise he'd tolerated because he believed tolerance was maturity. I told myself it was peace, he said. But it was really endurance. That word landed hard. Endurance. Because endurance is what people call discomfort when they're proud of surviving it. I didn't interrupt. Admissions need room. I always warned you about money, he went on. About profit. I know, I said. I thought I was protecting you, he added. I nodded. You were protecting yourself. He smiled faintly. Maybe, he said. The next family gathering felt different again. Not awkward. Intimate. My uncle didn't speak much. When he did, it wasn't in conclusions. It was in questions. How do you decide what's worth paying for? What tells you something is costing too much? When do you know it's time to change the environment instead of yourself? No one noticed the shift but me. But it mattered. Later, he pulled me aside. I don't think profit buys peace, he said carefully. I waited. But I do think it gives you options, he continued. And I didn't give those enough credit. I smiled. That's all I ever thought, I replied. The admission deepened over time. Not dramatically. Gradually. He stopped repeating his favorite phrase. When someone else said it, profit can't buy peace, he didn't nod anymore. He stayed quiet. That silence spoke volumes. One afternoon, he asked if I'd walk through the house with him again. Not as a skeptic. As a student. He noticed things he'd missed before. How sound softened in certain rooms. How sightlines reduced tension. How nothing felt accidental. You planned this, he said. Yes, I replied. For peace, he added. For agency, I corrected gently. He nodded. That distinction mattered now. I used to think peace meant not wanting more, he said. And now? I asked. And now I think it means wanting less noise, he replied. I smiled. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The man who warned me against profit was now asking how to use it responsibly. Not to impress. Not to expand. But to correct. One night, as we stood on the porch, he said something quietly. I think I confused virtue with limitation. I looked at him. That's common, I said. And dangerous, he asked. Yes, I replied. If you never examine it. He exhaled slowly. The admission changed how he spoke to others too. Less warning. More curiosity. He stopped assuming that discomfort was noble. Stopped framing sacrifice as proof. And in doing so, he softened. But admissions don't end stories. They open the final door. Because once someone accepts they were wrong about why something matters, they have to face what they missed while believing it. And that reckoning? That was coming next. The reckoning didn't arrive as regret. It arrived as quiet inventory. My uncle started noticing things he'd ignored for years. The way his walls were thinner than he remembered. How every sound from the street pulled his attention. How often he apologized for things that weren't his fault. Noise had been normal to him. Until it wasn't. One afternoon, he knocked on my door again. Not to comment. Not to caution. To sit. We didn't talk right away. The silence between us felt different now. Chosen, not endured. You know, he said finally, I always thought peace was something you learned to live with. I waited. I never thought it was something you could design, he added. I nodded. That's because no one told you it was allowed, I said. He smiled sadly. He began spending more time outside his own house. Longer walks. Later evenings. As if distance itself was teaching him something. He noticed how often he felt on edge, and how quickly it faded when he crossed into calmer space. That's unsettling, he admitted once. To realize how much you adapt without noticing. Yes, I said. That's why people defend discomfort. Admitting it was optional hurts. The reckoning deepened when repairs came up. A leak he'd ignored. A fence he'd patched one too many times. He complained less. Questioned more. At what point does endurance become self-neglect? He asked one evening. I didn't answer. Because he already knew. At the next family gathering, someone repeated his old phrase again. Profit can't buy peace. My uncle didn't nod. Didn't smile. He looked at me instead. Then said quietly, it can buy silence. And silence teaches you what peace actually feels like. The room went still. Not uncomfortable. Attentive. Later, he pulled me aside. I spent years warning people not to want too much, he said. I think I was really warning myself not to hope. That sentence carried weight. Because hope, once admitted, demands responsibility. He asked me something unexpected. Do you ever feel guilty? He asked. For choosing better? I thought about it. No, I replied. I felt guilty when I stayed. He nodded slowly. That answer landed deeper than anything else. The reckoning wasn't about money. It was about permission. Permission he'd never given himself to adjust his life instead of adjusting his expectations. One evening, he said something that surprised us both. I'm thinking of moving. Not far. Not grand. Just intentionally. I smiled. You don't have to justify that, I said. I know, he replied. That's new. The house next door had done its work. Not as an asset. As a contrast. It showed what was possible when discomfort wasn't treated as a virtue. The reckoning reached its quiet peak one night as we sat on the porch again. I used to think peace meant accepting what you can't change, he said. And now? I asked. And now I think it means changing what you don't have to accept, he replied. I smiled. That was it. There was nothing left to prove. No argument to win. Just an understanding settling into place. But the story wasn't finished yet. Because reckoning is internal. Resolution is visible. And the final shift, the one that would make everything undeniable, was still ahead. The neighborhood didn't change overnight. That's the thing about real peace. It doesn't announce itself. It settles in. The house next door stayed quiet. Not empty, intentional. No rotating tenants. No late-night engines. No noise pretending to be normal. Just stillness. And stillness has a way of revealing what you've been missing all along. My uncle moved differently now. Slower. More deliberate. He stopped filling silence with commentary. Stopped correcting people mid-sentence. One afternoon, he said something I never expected to hear. I sleep better when it's quiet, he admitted. I smiled. So do I replied. He never apologized for what he'd said before. He didn't need to. People don't apologize when understanding replaces certainty. They adjust. Months passed. The house remained exactly as it was meant to be. Not flashy. Not impressive. Effective. I didn't rent it out. Didn't flip it. Didn't talk about it. Because the purpose wasn't profit. It was control. One evening, as we sat on the porch again, my uncle broke the silence. You know, he said, I used to think people bought things to fill a void. I waited. And now? I asked. And now I think some people buy things to protect what matters, he said. That was the closest thing to a confession I'd ever get. The phrase he'd repeated for years faded quietly from his vocabulary. No one noticed. But I did. Because beliefs don't disappear loudly. They dissolve when they can no longer explain reality. A neighbor asked me once if I planned to do anything with the house. I already did, I replied. She looked confused. I smiled. The irony of it all never stopped amusing me. My uncle had warned me that profit couldn't buy peace. He was right, in the way people are right when they've only seen one version of the truth. Profit doesn't buy peace by itself. It buys options. And options let you remove what disturbs you instead of pretending it doesn't. I didn't buy peace to prove a point. I bought it because I was tired of borrowing it from circumstance. Borrowed peace disappears when conditions change. Owned peace stays. My uncle moved a year later. Not far. Just enough. A quieter street. Fewer apologies. More space between noises. When he told me, he didn't frame it as an upgrade. He framed it as a correction. I didn't realize how loud my life was, he said. I nodded. Most people don't, I replied. They just adapt. We stood there for a moment. 2 houses apart. 2 philosophies reconciled. Not by debate. By outcome. If there's a lesson here, it isn't that money solves everything. It doesn't. But it does solve specific things, when used without ego. Noise. Pressure. Proximity to chaos. And those are the things that quietly drain you if you pretend they don't matter. I didn't buy peace to feel superior. I bought it so I could hear myself think. So I could wake up without bracing for sound. So I could live in alignment with the life I'd worked hard to build. And the house next door? That was just the receipt. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.